Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another unit analysis video. In this week's episode we'll take a look at everyone's favorite battle line, literally the only battle line we have, the Hearthkyn Warriors. We'll take a look at who they are exactly, how to best equip them, discuss how to best use them, look at some stratagems and combos, and of course wrap the video up with some important considerations to keep in mind when you decide to field this unit. But before we go any further, I want to remind you all that we now have a Discord server for the channel where you could join free of charge and interact with a growing community of like-minded Votann players, talk tactics, share photos, and even get your models featured in my weekly videos. As we see here with this absolutely beautifully painted Hearthkyn Warrior, painted by one of our Discord members, Tamsin. So if you want in on the fun, don't forget to join our server using the link in the description below. So who are the Hearthkyn Warriors? Well, in the lore, they represent the kin's primary battle line infantry. Rules-wise, these guys are our only battle line troop unit. They're very cheap, they're very disposable, they have good OC for primary and objective play, and they're quite viable for scoring secondaries as action monkeys or being a primary dump by throwing a bunch of models and just weight of OC trying to get an objective. In terms of data card, for 110 points you get 10 models in the unit consisting of movement speed 5, toughness 5, 4 up base save, 1 wound leadership 7, and OC 2. Out of the 10 models, you'll be able to take one Thane, who acts as the sergeant for the squad, and he has access to a 4+ invulnerable save, but still remains at 1 wound. You also have access to 3 different warrior abilities or options, and you could take all 3 of these in the squad without any limitation because they're free. The first of these is the ability to ignore cover. The second one is when you target this unit with a CP strat, you, on a 5+, get the CP back. You also have the option of taking a Medipack, which means everybody in the unit gets a 6+ feel no pain, which is actually quite handy sometimes, but more on this in a little bit. Additionally, you have the ability Luck Has, Need Keeps, and Toil Earns, which, I mean, just in itself, if that isn't the coolest name for an ability in the game, I don't know what is. But what this allows you to do is, at the end of your command phase, if you have this unit sitting on an objective and you own it, then you sticky it, which is a really strong ability because it means you don't have to commit resources to staying on the objective to own it. You get to move out and do other things with them. So a really strong ability to have on your battle line. Now, most importantly with this unit is the ability to take your squad of 10 at the beginning of the game and combat squad them into 2 smaller squads of 5. And this is done via your Sagittar transport. That means at the beginning of the game, when you are declaring your reserves and you're declaring your transports, if you decide to fill your Sagittar with 5 of these Hearthkyn Warriors, you are allowed to combat squad and put the other 5 somewhere else, which is huge. This means essentially, it's the cheapest way to fill the transport, which is necessary because in order to bring the Sagittar, you have to pay a tax in order to put something inside because it is a dedicated transport. This means that this is the cheapest way in order to fill your transport, coming in at just 55 points when you consider that it's 110 for a squad of 10 and you divide that by 2. Now, in terms of weapon options, there are a lot. And don't worry, we're going to do the math on every single one. No, I'm joking. Don't worry. We're actually not going to do the math on all of these. It's not necessary at all. Basically, to break this down, you have 2 primary weapon choices you're taking by default for the squad. And that's either going to be the Autok pattern bolter gun or the ion blaster. And then from there, you have the ability to upgrade the weapon on your Thane to be either a plasma pistol, an ion pistol, or a bolter pistol. And then for the rest of the squad, you get to upgrade 2 other weapon choices to something listed here on your screen. But we'll come back to this in a little bit. So like I mentioned earlier, these guys come by default in squads of 10, and they could be combat squadded through a Sagittar, meaning you fill your transport up for 55 points. This is a pretty solid inclusion, and it's one of the primary reasons people run this battle line unit in the army. As such, we don't really ever see at a competitive level a full squad of 10 because it basically serves no purpose. They're very vulnerable, they're very fragile, and yes, you can attach a Grimnir, which is the only character that can attach the unit, providing +1 toughness, but ultimately, what's the point of having toughness 6 when you only have 1 wound and a 4 up base save? You'll still melt. Another restriction is that if you do decide to include a Grimnir, it's kind of anti-synergistic because you can't actually fit the Grimnir with the 5 troops inside of a Sagittar, because the two drones that accompany the Grimnir unfortunately take up seats. Not sure why, but they currently do. This means if you do decide to include a Grimnir, you have to start him on the table with the remaining 5. I don't think there's personally a ton of value in having this setup, because what is the point? You're going to have toughness 6, 1 wound, 4-up base save units sitting on your home objective where you've invested an additional 65 points just to give them that +1 toughness and slightly more durability. I personally don't see the value in this, and it looks like many competitive lists don't either. So what is the purpose of this unit then, if we're not willing to invest the extra points and we're using them to fill our transports instead? Well, they're basically just cannon fodder. They're there to move block, they're there to OC dump, they're there to be secondary action monkeys, and like I said, they're there to fill the Sagittars, which is really the main benefit. We're trying to keep the cost as low as possible, and because of that, we don't want to invest the Grimnir into the unit. And like I said, he doesn't even fit inside the transport with the squad. So let's go back to these weapon options then. We're going to start off with the primary choice, and that is between the Autok Pattern Bolter and the Ion Blaster. We'll start with these and work our way through the rest. In terms of weapon profiles, the Autok Pattern Bolter, which I'll just refer to as Bolter for the rest of this video, comes in at 24-inch range, 2 attacks, BS4, strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage. The Ion Blaster conversely is 18-inch range, so somewhat shorter, has only half the number of attacks at 1, remains at BS4 with a strength 5, minus 2 AP, 1 damage profile. Which one's better? Okay, so initially I was going to do a comparison of these two guns without any judgment tokens on the target for the first time ever, because logically these little guys will rarely be in the fray shooting at a judged target. But I came across a comment on Reddit last night where someone was describing how the judgment tokens facilitate the effectiveness of our guns, which obviously I totally agree, it's factually true, but they called out the Ion Blaster specifically on the Hearthkyn Warriors as being a particularly egregious example of this, as it allowed them to punch above their weight. I kind of doubted this because in my experience, I actually found that they were inconsequential, and I think the bolters are generally considered to be the best value. So I decided to do a 2-for-1, see if my gut was right, while also displaying the profile damage differences to you guys in this video. So yes, again, we will be assuming 2 judgment tokens and bare bones, meaning no cover, no strats, just the profile into a target. And so what we get is a table that looks like this. I basically took the bolter stats, I ran them with the chance to hit, being a +1 to hit, and then I ran it against the save characteristics and the toughness brackets with +1 to wound factored in. Immediately, it looks like the best way that you get value out of shooting this gun is if you're targeting something that is less than toughness 4 with a 4-up, 5-up, or 6-up base save. In these cases, think of something that's toughness 3 with a 6+ save, you'll be inflicting 0.94 wounds per model, so per bolter in your squad. This isn't for the full squad, it's just per model equipped with a bolter. So that's pretty good if you think about it like that. Each guy picks up 1 guy in return. For a 55-point unit anyway, not bad. The next area where we see some damage come through is at the toughness 4 level with a 5+ and 6+ base save. So here again, we're getting between 0.5 and 0.75 damage that goes through on average, so between half and 1 wound. The next area I'll draw your attention to is when we look at things with a 3-up base save being less than toughness 4, at toughness 4, or greater than toughness 4 and less than toughness 8. So for one model, you're getting between 0.22 and 0.37 unsaved wounds or damage that goes through to these targets. But when you multiply that by 5, you're basically reliably getting 1 wound through with a squad of 5. So if you had to chip off 1 wound off of something in this bracket, you could reliably do so with 5 guys. So that on its own doesn't really tell us a whole bunch unless we compare it to the Ion Blaster. So let's take a look at that right now and see what we get. And again, this is using the exact same parameters for 1 attack, BS4, strength 5, minus 2 AP, 1 damage. Plugging those numbers in using the same exact math, we get a table that looks like this. And this time I included the invulnerable saves because that is impacted by AP, whereas the bolter that has no AP just ignores it. So right off the bat, it looks like the only place where we can reliably get between half a wound to 1 wound if we shoot with 1 model holding an Ion Blaster is at something that's less than toughness 5 with a 5+ or 6+ base save, which is surprising to me, to be honest. If we look at the different toughness profiles across the table at a 2-up, 3-up, and 4-up base save, we actually see between an underwhelming 0.11 and a high of 0.46 damage that goes through. But if we keep in mind that this is for one single model and we multiply any of these values by 5, being 5 models in the unit, we actually pretty reliably get somewhere between half a damage to 1 full damage that goes through, chipping off a wound on something anywhere in this section when we don't look at profiles with invulnerable saves. Now, when we do consider invulnerable saves, we see the damage actually drops quite steeply and pretty significantly. And this makes a lot of sense, obviously, because the main benefit to bringing this gun is the 2 AP. So if we neuter that 2 AP, we've essentially lost all the value because now we're running half the number of shots. Yes, it's at a higher strength, but what we see here is that the damage falls significantly. Of course, again, because we're not making use of the AP of this profile. So let's run the Ion and the Bolters side by side to see what kind of differences we see. Putting the two tables together, we get something that looks like this. And I removed the blur that was over the invulnerable saves for the Bolters, just so you can have a nice consistent view of the two tables lined up side by side. So right off the bat, the first thing I notice here is that for something that's toughness 4 or less, we actually end up with more damage coming from the Ion Blaster when we compare this to the Bolter for targets with a 2 or 3 up base save, where there appears to be more value in having better AP on the shot when compared to a higher volume of fire. Because a 2-up base save going to a 4 means there are probably higher chances of you failing one of your saves as a defender. However, as the save characteristic worsens, we actually see the Bolter take the lead against toughness 3 targets as the extra AP is often wasted or not enough to offset the volume of shots. This is true except for the toughness 4 level. However, the difference is very marginal, as you can see. At toughness 5, the Ion takes the lead against better saves as we see the 2+, 3+, and 4+ level. But it does fall off against things with a 5+ or a 6-up base save. I was going to say there aren't any data sheets at toughness 5 with a 6-up base save, but that's false because our very own Berserks fit into this category. So, maybe this is going to be helpful to prepare you for a mirror match. Beyond toughness 5, it's relatively equivalent except at the 2+ base save level where the Ion does actually continue to come out ahead by quite a bit when you consider multiplying the damage by 5 for half a squad. That said, we're still really only talking about a single wound of damage, if any. So it's nothing to write home about, but it can help if you absolutely need to chip something. However, for anything at a 3+ or 4+ base save at this level, it's actually much closer than I would have thought. It surprisingly appears that for things at toughness 6 and toughness 7, you actually get more mileage out of the Bolter. Even at toughness 8, where we would expect to see the extra strength of the Ion boost the damage past the threshold, it actually still falls behind to the Bolter, being equivalent in output at the 3+ level and slightly behind at the 4+ level. This discrepancy is amplified when we look at invulnerable saves, where if you shoot at anything that impairs the AP of your Ion, the Bolter's extra shot, despite being a lower strength, simply provides more damage and therefore more value. So to sum all that up, it looks like there are marginal damage differences between the Ion and the Bolter, except into very specific targets, such as T3 Chaff, where the Bolter comes out on top, or toughness 5, or things with a higher toughness and a 2-up base save. Here we see the Ion take the lead, but it's ever so slightly being able to chip one wound. Then when we go back to invulnerable saves, we see that the Bolter comes out on top simply because the weight of fire, double the number of shots, has more of an impact when we consider that the AP is wasted. It's also important to remember that the Bolters have an extra 6 inches of range, being 24 inches when you compare it to the Ions at 18. Yes, it's only 6 inches, but it can actually have a difference if you're trying to pick up some kind of chaff unit sitting on an objective somewhere, and with your 5-inch move, you're just barely out of range. This might help you actually connect the shots. It generally also looks like the Bolters provide more diverse targets where you actually do get a little bit more damage than compared to the Ion. Ultimately, I think the differences are so marginal that you can't really go wrong with either one. But if you consider some of the potential targets you might be shooting this unit into, I feel like the Bolters will come out on top because you're probably going to be shooting these guns into something that's single wound and with a high model count in the unit sitting on a primary or trying to deny yours. So in short, you can't really go wrong with either one, but I tend to prefer the bolter simply because of the extra 6-inch range, and it seems to have more play into more various targets. Okay, let's take a look at the other weapon profiles. Out of respect for your time and mine, I don't think it's worth going through each and every single one because a lot of these have very logical, deductible choices with a very clear solution or answer in terms of which one you should select. Let's start with the Thane, the easiest one. So like I said, only one model in the unit of 10 is a Thane. The Thane has a 4+ invulnerable save, he still has 1 wound, and in terms of weapon loadouts, by default, he is equipped with the bolter and an Autok pattern bolt pistol. Now the bolt pistol comes in at 1 attack, BS4, strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage, so it's basically the exact same as the parent gun, except shorter range being 12, and it's a pistol instead. He has the ability to change this pistol for one of 2 other options. He can swap it for a plasma pistol, which is again 1 attack, strength 8, minus 3 AP, 2 damage, or an ion pistol, which is 1 attack, 4 up, strength 5, minus 2 AP, 1 damage. There is literally no reason not to take a plasma pistol over the other guns. It is strictly superior in every single way except for the range. But considering that 1, you'll likely be firing the pistol in melee if you survive long enough, and that 2, the weapon that the pistol replaces has the exact same profile as the parent gun, except it's a pistol so you could shoot it in melee, there's no reason not to change this pistol for the better one. So you will always take a plasma pistol instead. Now he also has the option of changing his default bolter, not the pistol but the bolter itself, into either an ion blaster or a melee option, which is a kin melee weapon. We're not going to look at the kin melee weapon just yet. We will touch upon this later in the video, but for now, if you want to actually change the ranged weapon, you change the pistol and you make it a plasma instead. Clear cut. So what about the rest of the squad, and what about the rest of the guns? Well, like I said at the beginning of the video, 2 out of the 8, besides the Thane, can have their primary weapons upgraded to any one that you see here on the screen highlighted. The only catch is that you can't have 2 of the same upgraded gun, so you have to only pick 1 unique gun out of this list, and you can't put it on the model that's equipped with one of the war gear options. But you'll always be able to fit all of it in a list, simply because you have more models than options available. So which weapon should you take? So the first option is an Edakarn Plasma Beamer. This is sustained hits D3, 18-inch range, 1 attack, BS4, strength 8, minus 3, 2 damage. So not too dissimilar from what we saw with the plasma pistol, which was a solid choice for the Thane, but this is a bigger gun and accessible to someone else in the squad. The next choice we have is the High-Las Auto Rifle. This one has Assault, Rapid Fire 3, it's 24 inches, it's 3 attacks, BS4, strength 6, minus 1 AP, and 1 damage. The next weapon is the High-Las Rotary Cannon. It's heavy instead of Assault, it sustained hits 1, comes in at 24 inches, 6 attacks, BS5, strength 6, minus 1 AP, 1 damage. So it looks like it's a slightly stronger option than the previous gun mentioned. It has more attacks, but the BS is slightly worse, and it has the heavy keyword to compensate for that. The other 2 choices are the L7 missiles and the Magna Rail rifle. So again, we have these 2 guns that we actually saw on some of our other units, being the Sagittar and the Hecaton Land Fortress, but they're kind of like a little baby version of these guns instead. The L7 missile comes with 2 modes of fire. You have the blast one, which is D6, BS4, strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage, and the L7 missile focused mode, which is the last cannon shot, being strength 9, minus 2 AP, D6 on a single shot. The last option that I mentioned is the Magna Rail rifle, which is devastating wounds. It's heavy, 18-inch shot, 1 attack, BS5, strength 12, minus 3 AP, D3 plus 3 damage. And for those of you that are looking at the screen right now, you might be seeing a slight spoiler in that I highlighted one of these miniguns in green. And there's a very good reason for that, and that is because, in my opinion, the High-Las Auto Rifle with the Assault keyword is an auto-include as an upgrade. You will always take this weapon, not because of its output, not because of its strength, but because of its keyword, Assault. Why is this, you might ask? Well, because of secondaries, the value of Assault. There are 3 secondaries in the game that rely on you being eligible to shoot in order to perform the action. That means that if you want to get into a specific area of the board, and with your very slow and tedious 5-inch move speed on the unit, makes you unable to actually get within 9 inches of a table quarter, or the center of the battlefield, or your opponent's deployment zone. What do? You can't advance, you miss out on the secondary. But by taking the assault gun, you're actually able to roll an advance roll and still be eligible to shoot. So you get some extra movement and mobility to be able to reach your destination and still count as being able to shoot your weapon. This is massive. Just innately, even if it doesn't always come up, baking this into your list already gives you an edge, because now you have the potential to be able to score one of these secondaries in case you weren't positioned properly to begin with. Let's look at a quick infographic example. So here we have a nice deployment zone set up on Leviathan layout 3, and we see there are 5 objective markers set up, and this is the current board state. I have a unit of 5 Hearthkyn Warriors sitting on my home objective, and I have a Sagittar holding 5 other ones at the top corner objective, just sitting there. Now let's say I draw Investigate Signals. There you go, you see it highlighted on the screen. This is roughly 9 inches from the table edge. What do? How do I get there? Well, I could disembark from the Sagittar, get my 3-inch extra movement, move my 5, and then roll an advance. I roll my advance, I make it wholly within the table edge, and now I get to do that activation with that unit. Same thing with the ones in my deployment zone. Maybe it was impossible to get them all in because of how I deployed. Now, I could guarantee to get that last model in range simply by rolling a 1 or a 2 on the advance roll. So that takes care of one option. Now what about your second upgrade? Which weapon do you choose? Well, this one is quite flexible, and it really just comes down to personal preference. What would you rather have? In my experience, it's mostly inconsequential what you choose. I do have a favorite that I tend to run, but I'll list and go over quickly the different reasons you might choose to include any one of these weapons in your list. Something that's more of an elite model killer, something close to 2-3 wounds, I'd recommend the Hearthkyn Plasma Beamer. If you're looking for something that's medium to low toughness, you go with the high las rotary cannon for the high number of shots and decent AP. And if you want something that's safer, a nice mix of both, being more elite and more anti-tank and also slightly more horde clearing, you could go with the L7 missile launcher because you have access to blast and you have access to the focused mode. The last option, the Magna rifle, is really designed for a high toughness model to deliver a high damage killing blow. My personal preference, I like going with the Magna Rail rifle. I think it adds a little extra threat to a 55-point unit, and believe me, it does connect. It's actually pretty hilarious when you shoot this gun and you end up doing 6 damage to a tank with your 55-point unit. It's pretty funny. So I would recommend you take the Magna Rail rifle as your second choice, simply because it allows you to punch up. It gives you a little bit of extra threat range, but it is unreliable. It's one shot. It is BS5, so you're probably going to miss it a lot of the times, but if it ever does connect, it's pretty funny, and you'll actually end up doing some work with it. Now, the last choice you have in terms of an upgraded weapon is going to be your kin melee weapon. And like I said with the Thane, you can choose to upgrade his weapon to this, or you can also take 2 of your units in the squad that are going to have their primary weapons upgraded to one of the ones we just mentioned, and instead give them the kin melee weapon for a little extra melee punch. So is this actually worth considering, or is this just a wasted pick? I threw the numbers here on the screen for you. At the top you see in black, this is the close combat weapon, and in red below we have the kin melee weapon. And this assumption is running on 0 judgment tokens. I don't think you'll ever get in combat with something with a judgment token, so it's probably a little insincere to list you this with a judgment token because it's unrepresentative of a realistic experience. So no judgment tokens, these are your 2 options. Close combat versus kin in red. What you'll immediately notice is that the close combat weapon is absolutely pitiful in terms of damage output. It's so bad that I would honestly consider not even bothering to roll the dice for this output. Now, conversely, when we look at the kin weapon, this is where we actually see some interesting numbers. Obviously, it's nothing too crazy, but one number that jumped out to me was at the toughness 4, 3+ base save. So take a Primaris Intercessor stat line, for example. I could maybe see a world where having the ability to reliably inflict 3 damage total with 3 models equipped with this weapon, being 0.89 damage each times 3, being able to actually have an impact on removing a single intercessor from an objective, being a squad of 5, resulting in you swinging the objective in your favor by now suddenly auto-seeing your opponent. So maybe you had to contest primary. Maybe you were in a position where you wanted to make a crazy charge with your guys and get your Hearthkyn Warriors onto an objective, just deny primary for your opponent's next turn. If they had 5 intercessors sitting on it, you make the charge, you pick one up, now suddenly your 10 OC to 8 OC, it's yours. Another maybe interesting area to look at is something that's maybe like a chaff 1 wound model, so something that's below toughness 4 or toughness 5. I think it could be useful in this case. Let's say you do get charged by that cheap 1 wound model unit. If you survive the initial hit, you could potentially inflict back 1 wound per kin weapon, and with the added attacks from the other 2 close combat models, you'll probably pick up around 3 or 4 in return, which means if they're OC1, you'll still keep the objective because you'll auto-C them at the start of your turn, or theirs. This is assuming, of course, that you only lose 1 model to their attacks, and you don't lose anything more. It's not a particularly common occurrence because if these guys get charged, let's just be honest, they're going to just all die. But I do think that it's worth mentioning and highlighting that the kin weapon can add a little bit of extra punch to the unit, which could be a surprising and interesting choice. That said, personally, I don't think it overshadows the ability to advance and be eligible to shoot, nor would I want to give up my Magna Rail rifle. Putting this information all together, in terms of primary weapons, they're roughly equivalent output between the Bolter and the Ion, but the Bolter does come out with better range, being 24 inches, and it seems to have better general use into more various profiles. So I would go with the Bolter, but you can't really go wrong either way. For secondary weapons, I think the High-Las Auto Rifle is an auto-include, and you always take this weapon simply for access to the Assault keyword. It unlocks scoring potential, and it is critical sometimes in order to ensure you get the victory. For your second upgrade, you could take basically anything here. I personally prefer to run the Magna because it helps to contribute to anti-tank shooting. It just helps make my 55-point unit, or when you think about it like this, 11-point model, actually be able to inflict some critical damage to a vehicle. Last but not least, for kin melee weapons, they can add around 3 extra wounds of damage into combat with a chaff unit, but in my opinion, it's not really worth losing out on some of the better weapon options you have available. For the Thane himself, I would take a plasma pistol every single time. It's just strictly better than your other weapon options, and you don't actually lose access to being able to shoot with your primary gun if you do decide to swap for this. You can only choose to use one or the other. You'll still have access to it on the model. But if you're in combat or you're within close range of something, the plasma pistol will do more damage than any of the other guns the Thane is equipped with. So in this case, you take the plasma pistol every time. In terms of tactics, I kind of want to go through a little bit as to why you should split your units and why it's actually worth doing so. The main benefit to splitting your warriors up is that you gain more efficiency. You can be in more places at once for the same amount of points. You therefore get more activations. This could be good in terms of scoring secondaries, it could be good in terms of board presence, or just getting more shots in at different targets. All in all, you also have a better role identity. This means that you can split your units up to have one that has all of the upgraded weapons inside that you're delivering somewhere to maybe be able to shoot a little bit more and pick up some more units reliably, or you can have one that's kitted out to simply sit back in your home objective, relax, and screen. What this means is that you get a better return of interest on your 110-point unit because you're able to separate it and go for specific key goals. You can have that same unit doing multiple things throughout a game on 2 different ends of the table. As such, you do get significantly more value by separating these 2 units and splitting them up appropriately. This doesn't even include the fact that you want to fill Sagittars up, and so by splitting them, you natively have access to bringing additional transports to your list. Conversely, if you decide not to split them, you do have a larger footprint, which maybe could be nice if you're trying to move block and screen a little bit better with this unit. You also have access to more wounds, so you could potentially soak more fire before losing an objective. But when you consider the role and the identity of this unit, it's not really worth doing. You want to split it up, you want to bring more vehicles, you want to be able to be in more places at once because we're so slow, and you need something cheap in this list that's going to be able to score you something and not shoot. So now that we know that we should be splitting them, the next question is, how do we split them? What kind of combination of models do we want inside of one split unit? There's no real right or wrong way to do this. I personally consider there to be one essential split in quotation marks being inside of a Sagittar, and I will typically put my Thane here with the 4++. I'll put the Assault keyword gun, and I'll put the Medipack inside as well. You can optionally also put the CP regen model in if you want as well. And the reasoning behind this little essential package I call that's inside of the Sagittar is that I'm thinking about this unit in terms of being able to score me any secondaries that I need or contesting primary somewhere on the table that the Sagittar helps accelerate them into position 4. So let's say I need to get out and do something, whether it's score a secondary or stand on a primary. I have access to the Assault gun, which means I could disembark if I don't want to move my Sagittar and then be able to move and advance, providing me with some extra mobility and movement to ensure I get into position. That's why the Assault gun is with this squad. I'm going to be primed somewhere on the table that the Sagittar takes me to be able to hop out and score me my secondary. Now the Thane and the Medipack are included because let's say I do try to get out and achieve this goal and my opponent overwatches me. This unit is exceptionally vulnerable. They are only toughness 5 with a single wound and a 4-up base save. So if they shoot at me with something that has high AP, they're basically dead. So I will soak that on my Thane first with the 4+ invulnerable save, and hopefully he's able to survive and absorb these shots. The Medipack comes into play for anything that does actually seep through to the rest of the squad. In this case, I have a very slight chance of simply shrugging it off. It's a feel no pain. In that case, I'm a little bit more survivable. I have something to soak my shots, being the Thane. I have something that allows me to run into position quickly and still be eligible through the secondary, being the Assault gun, and I'm able to shrug any incoming wounds with the Medipack. It's not a crazy big difference, but small changes like this in this package, I think, are really helpful in optimizing your chances of succeeding with the unit. In terms of the CP regen model, I think you could maybe put this in if, let's say, there was some game-breaking opportunity to get somewhere on the table with your unit, and you fail the advance roll with something miserable like a 1. Okay, maybe I spend a CP, I re-roll it, and on a 5+, I get that CP back. Who knows? It could be something you throw in there. Another little combo you could do is put your ignore cover model in the same squad as your upgraded weapon. So for me in this case, I keep my ignore cover paired with the Magna Rail model because it's one shot, and if I do end up getting it through, I want to make sure that my opponent has a reduced chance of saving it. So by pairing this model with the ignore cover model, I just help ensure slightly more optimization in terms of ensuring that the damage goes through. Okay, so how do we use this model effectively? Well, I kind of sprinkled this throughout the video this time, as you might recall with this example here, showing you the benefit of having the Assault keyword and getting to a table corner and still being eligible to perform an action. But let's look at a couple other examples. In this first case, we're going to look at some deployment techniques. So a typical use is to start 5 on your home objective and another 5 warriors in a Sagittar. This allows you to sticky your home base and then commit the unit to screen in the backfield and score secondaries in your backfield, while your other assets like the bikes can play a little bit more aggressively or are free to roam around to score. In the event that you're playing against someone that has a pretty decent indirect shot that could wipe your squad in one go, let's say Death Guard with a Plague Burst Crawler, I will typically try to start the 5 warriors inside of a Sagittar on the objective. This way, if my opponent goes first, he doesn't really have anything to shoot at turn 1, and I kind of dictate at what point I want to disembark and put my little lads at risk. So what about the 5 other warriors that are supposed to be split? If I'm not starting them on the table, where are they going? Well, something interesting that I've been recently experimenting with is using your second squad of 5 that would otherwise be the ones standing on your home objective, and instead making them begin in strategic reserves, as this step is declared after you initially declare your transports. This could potentially allow you to come out turns 2 or even 3 and score something in a table corner, like signals, for only 55 points instead of committing your bikes to it. I do think you'll get more mileage by simply using your bikes for this because this is what they're designed to do, but if you're forced to put them in reserves because your opponent has a lot of indirect, and you know they're just going to die turn 1 and be useless anyway, why not get a little bit more value out of your unit and just put them in reserves? In terms of stratagem support, I don't really think there are that many impactful or particularly useful ones, if I'm being honest, for this unit. And that's not because they're a bad unit, it's just that none of the strats really affect their role or purpose. That said, I could kinda stretch my rationale to include two that may come up one day. They've never come up for me as of yet and probably never will, but hey, you never know. And the first one is Warrior Pride. So Warrior Pride, it could be impactful here because it allows you to add some extra AP to your weapon if the target has some judgment tokens on them. This might perhaps come into play if you have your kin melee weapons equipped on the squad. It allows you to essentially go to AP4, which is pretty funny if you think about it. You would essentially be able to charge something like Intercessor sitting on objective, and now suddenly you're hitting them with 6, strength 5, minus 3 or 4 AP depending on how many tokens they have. 2 damage attacks that would basically instantly kill as soon as they connect because they won't get a save. This could potentially be handy if you have to swing an objective. I think the other one that may be useful, I've never had to use this before, but it's Newfound Nemesis. Let's say you do decide to advance that unit or move them somewhere to score you some points, and they get overwatched, and your opponent just reduces you down to below half strength. You might want to pop this strat if you have a plethora of CP available to you, and suddenly the enemy gets an extra judgment token on them. Not really game breaking, not really that impactful, but it might help, you never know. Wrapping the video up, I want to leave you all with some considerations to keep in mind for when you decide to field this unit. And the first one is that it's a cheap unit, but it's also a finite resource. We don't want to overload our list with these battle line units. We want to use the few we do bring effectively. So don't go overboard with these. They don't really have any output, and when you consider them for secondaries, the bikes are actually technically cheaper up front, and they're more mobile, and they do more damage. That said, these guys do have a very clear purpose in the list. They are useful, and if you kit them out correctly, they can actually have pretty good secondary play as well with the assault keyword. And there are some little nifty tricks you can use to get some more mobility, like the plus 3 inches to your movement after you disembark. You essentially get to do an 8-inch move because you disembark 3, then you do your 5-inch, and then if you roll in advance because you have the assault keyword, you'll on average add an extra 3.5 inches to that. The second consideration I want to leave you with is to consider your matchup and deployment. Do they have access to indirect? How accessible for you are the table quarters? Where should you be deploying? Do you need to begin moving your Hearthkyn Warriors towards a specific objective, maybe with supply drop for example, after you sticky your home one? It's important to keep in mind that this is a very fragile unit, and this comes up often with Overwatch. So maybe you should try to separate your squad and build them to protect the assault keyword model that's in the unit, as I mentioned earlier, by pairing it with the 4++ and the Medipack. Another interesting tactic you can do is use this unit to bait trades and points. It's 55 points, so you shouldn't be afraid for it to die. If you have to throw something onto the center objective for area denial and your opponent isn't there and they're staged and ready to go, why would you throw something expensive when you could just throw this 55-point unit? You score your points, he has to come out to deny you because now you're OC 10 on it, and if he doesn't, well then you own the middle objective and you're properly staged on your side, ready to countercharge. So it's a good way to bait trades, and for the points, it's not really something I'd be concerned over throwing away a model for if I know I'm going to end up getting some extra value out of them. The last consideration I'll leave you with is to remember that these guys are OC2, which is really good. This essentially means you can keep them stored inside of a Sagittar, get your Sagittar close to an objective, and then simply pop these models out, and suddenly you're plus 10 OC on that objective, and your opponent can't really do anything about it unless they overwatch or kill you. Ultimately, the Hearthkyn Warriors are a pretty solid, cost-effective battle line unit that provides pretty decent value in terms of native abilities, ranged weapon options, OC, keywords, and their ability to combat squad inside of Sagittars, meaning you could be in more places at once, doing more things, and getting more points. As always, if you enjoyed this video and kind of content, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the Hearthkyn Warriors, how they've been performing in your lists, and how you find them. Consider joining our Discord server free of charge to join in on all things Votann related. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.